Hello, I'm Jeremy Vine. This is Panorama.
I never experienced anything like this before, and I was petrified, to be honest.
Tonight, is Britain still a free country when it comes to the right to protest?
There are those small elements who decide to come out and act unlawfully, and if they do that, then we as a police service have to take the appropriate form of action.
You might think you should expect rough handling if you turn out for demos like this. But away from the public eye, are we losing something more important? Now, unless you're one of those who takes an active part in political demonstrations or direct action, the G20 protests might have come as something of a wake-up call. Seeing police officers lash out and others with their identifying numbers covered up was a surprise, but not to those who feel strongly enough about the big issues to take to the streets. They have been saying for years that their right to protest is being curbed. And as Raphael Ronau reports, they include some unlikely suspects.
Radley Lakes in Oxfordshire, the heart of the English countryside. When a power company planned to dump ash in them, even the most conventional Middle Englanders were ready to revolt. A retired government scientist, Dr. Harbour's hardly a natural rebel.
Who are the late campaigners? Are they extreme activists?
There's an ecologist, there's a lawyer, and there are various school teachers, those sort of people. They're very ordinary members of the community, well informed, and they can become expert in almost any subject they turn their hands to.
Yet he became a suspect on a national police website, set up to respond to the threat of domestic extremists.
There are so many laws that have been developed by this government which gradually chip away at the edges of what one is allowed to do, that they make it almost impossible to protest legitimately and to obey the law.
The story of how a scientist came to be listed alongside terrorists and animal rights extremists is a symptom of the way protest in Britain has changed and been changed by those who police it, by new laws that sound alien to our liberal traditions, new tactics and new technology. The G20 protests this spring were an eye-opener for anyone unaware of how things had changed. Many questioned whether the police had got the balance right in handling a large and potentially violent demo right in the heart of London. Scotland Yard said its intelligence was that things could get very violent. Her senior commander said we're up for it. By the end of the day, one man was dead, and within hours, social networking sites were carrying protesters' footage that swung public perception about allegations of police brutality. Among the mostly peaceful protesters, some were intent on violence. By the evening, a controversial police tactic was in full operation. Protesters call it kettling, the police containment. Either way, demonstrators were penned into restricted areas for up to 7 hours. Alex Constantinou was caught up in the kettling of a peaceful climate change protest.
They just suddenly started almost sort of marching forward in line, not only the front line, but with another line of police officers behind that. And doing this sort of business with their shields, like pushing people forward. And also when people were sat on the floor, just literally grabbing, manhandling them and pulling them back through their own police lines.
Police say people were free to leave. Protesters say they weren't.
Anybody within that crowd was free to leave if they wanted to. What that cordon position was put in place for was to prevent people from the other protests, which had turned violent, going in and joining the climate camp.
I've seen lots of videos where journalists, individuals trying to get out of that cordon?
I've spoken to the officers concerned who looked after that particular incident, and the briefing that was given to officers, wherever possible, you could allow people to come out of that cordon area.
That might have been the briefing, but it seems there was confusion on the front line, and not just at the climate camp containment.
I don't understand why, as a member of the press, I am not allowed to leave.
Former law lecturer and MP David Howarth questions whether containment is legal.
I don't know why they do this. It just seems to me to be a way of increasing the temperature of the demonstration, of making everyone concerned more anxious and fearful. And that I can't see any justification for. I can't see how in any way it's legal.
The Met say containment has been used on football supporters for years, but in its review of G20, the Home Affairs Select Committee says not allowing peaceful protesters to leave contained areas was inexcusable. The other key allegation made against police was that of excessive force.
He kind of threw his shield in using his elbow.
Where did he hit you? How much did it hurt?
It hit me on my temple there, on my head, and it was quite shocking at first, and then when I went and sat down I felt really concussed.
They're hitting me with the shield, sort of like nudged me back quite aggressively, but then this punch just came from nowhere.
Are any of your officers, for example, trained to punch somebody in the face?
There may be circumstances in which an officer can justify doing that. If police officers are faced with a situation where they feel they need to use reasonable force to secure compliance with an act or action, then they can use that reasonable force.
The independent watchdog, the Police Complaints Commission, received more than 270 complaints against the police, including nearly 60 of assault by officers. Other issues include police not wearing ID numbers. These complaints aren't new, but veteran environmental activist Hannah McClure witnessed something she'd not seen before. After being kettled to the early hours, she squatted overnight in an empty office block along with 80 others. They awoke to this: 100 officers getting ready to storm the building, 2 of them armed with laser-sighted tasers.
Would any member of the riot police be interested in negotiating peacefully with the peaceful occupiers of this building?
The squatters filmed what happened next. As 2 men leave the room with their hands up, watch through the glass for the police baton being used on one of them.
Sit down, guys. Come back, sit down.
The police ran in. The only first thing I remember seeing is a man in full riot gear pointing a taser gun at well, it felt like just at me, but it was at the whole group. I thought it was a real gun at first. So he was pointing a taser gun at us and he was holding it like that.
Face down on the floor, do it now, face down!
And he made us all lie on the ground with our hands out and our faces right on the ground, and we weren't allowed to look up, so he was just yelling at us, to us to get down. And I was in complete shock. I'd never experienced anything like this before, and I was petrified, to be honest.
The tasers weren't used. The threat was enough. Overreaction or justified caution.
It was an operation by officers designed to go and arrest a number of individuals for some serious offences, violent disorder. The officers going in had no idea of the numbers of people that would be inside, or the levels of violence that might be shown to them, given the violence that they'd seen from these individuals in the past, which is why we were going to arrest them.
Only 2 of the 83 squatters were actually arrested, and neither's yet been charged with any offence.
Concerns about police tactics, the use of excessive force and the containment of peaceful protesters have triggered a number of investigations into the policing of public protests.
G20 is not the only demo where police tactics and priorities have been widely questioned. One of the most notorious episodes still being argued over took place last summer. Police forces say they need advanced details of protest so they can control them effectively and safely. But activists often don't want to share, especially if they're planning direct action, which might include trespass, sit-ins or criminal damage.
This is what democracy looks like! This is what democracy looks like!
The 1,000 demonstrators who set up a climate camp planned civil disobedience in protest at E.ON's plans to build the first in a new generation of coal-fired power plants. Some 1,400 officers were called in from 25 forces. The outnumbered protesters complained of constant searches and personal property being seized to prevent crime.
They took my crayon. They took some children's washable chalk. And ironing boards. Yeah. They took our tent pegs.
The wire for wiring up my solar panels.
My toenail clippers.
My bike lock. My bike lock.
My bike lock took my walking stick.
More understandably, they also seized homemade rafts on which demonstrators planned to paddle round and perhaps pierce the energy plant security perimeter.
No time to block. This vessel enters the water, you'll be arrested, you understand? You understand?
In all, 9,000 searches were carried out. One person was searched 25 times and around 2,000 items seized.
The cost of policing climate camp at Kingsnorth was more than £5 million. So was this extensive police operation completely over the top or essential for upholding law and order?
Police presence was actually far more than I expected. I was quite outraged. On the way up to camp, every single person was stopped and searched.
Shirley Pearce had a walking stick because she'd had a knee replacement operation.
They pulled me over to one side and said they were going to confiscate the stick because they'd seen me walk from the previous point to them without actually using it.
And it wasn't just protesters. Under the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act, locals, even tourists, were subject to searches, and in most cases, officers didn't have to provide reasonable grounds. The police use of stop and search at Kingsnorth is now under judicial review.
Come on. Thumbs up, thank you. Oh, tickles.
Searching under Section 6 for dangerous weapons and then reading details off his card. It's completely unlawful.
99 people were arrested at the Kingsnorth climate camp. According to Kent Police, 68 police officers were injured. You may think, hearing that, the police came under sustained attack.
But a Freedom of Information request revealed those injuries to be stung on finger by possible wasp, officer succumbed to sun and heat, officer injured sitting in car.
Looking down the list, there's hay fever, headache, diarrhoea, even toothache. In fact, out of the total number of injuries recorded, only 4 were from direct contact with protesters.
This serving magistrate, former Conservative MP and current chair of the Kent branch of the Campaign to Protect Rural England, found himself on the wrong side of the law.
We were asked by a group of youngsters to go down to Fort Amherst and give them a talk about the effects of climate change in Kent.
It was 2 weeks before the Kingsnorth climate camp protest, and those at the meeting found themselves being monitored by police.
Not only were our number plates noted down, but our photographs taken by the police. I was concerned about this, and so I contacted the police about how long these records would be held for. I was told that they would only be held for as long as was necessary, but I subsequently found out that they could be held for a period of 7 years. And I don't understand why they feel they need to do that with people who patently, obviously, aren't involved in any group which is involved in terrorism.
What it seems to me is the police have got themselves into a mindset nationally where they think of environmental protesters as at least potentially political extremists. And that fits in with the views of the energy companies and, I'm afraid, with the views of at least one government department.
Under the Freedom of Information Act, we've discovered police passed on intelligence about the Kingsnorth protesters' plans to the power company E.ON. And the newly formed Government Department of Energy and Climate Change has told us that, given what it calls the risk posed to the power supply by environmental protest, it will exchange information with both the police and private enterprise. Mr. Knox Johnston wrote to Kent Police to complain about his photo and number plate details being kept on file. Eventually they wrote back saying that if the information does not form part of an investigation of criminality around the protest, then it's disposed of. But that didn't tell him whether the information had actually been destroyed, so we asked Kent Police for him. They've told us his details are still on file.
I think if you're just a normal citizen and you've gone along to listen to a talk, to find out that your number plate has been taken and photographed taken as well, you would feel intimidated. You'd feel, well, I'm not sure I want to go to a meeting again if that's what's going to happen.
Once the protest began, protesters said they too were repeatedly photographed and filmed by police forward intelligence teams, or FIT teams. But the watchers were themselves being watched.
It's a search area.
Yeah.
If you're not being searched, you're not permitted on there.
Okay.
Right.
So no legal observers are being allowed in there.
Well, that's what I just told you.
FIT teams are uniformed officers who are there with the public. They engage with the public. They talk to them. FIT stands for Forward Intelligence Teams. They are there to understand what's going on, and they keep people safe.
We've obtained a copy of a FIT team recording filmed at Kingsnorth.
A lot of press officers, I just think they're bloody wandering in and out of the field. It's wrong, I think. I agree. Trust them less than the protesters.
It seems the officers are as interested in those covering the event as those taking part.
You don't like having this photograph taken. That there with the bald head.
Kent Police later accepted that journalists covering the event should not have been filmed.
We asked Kent Police for an interview about Kingsnorth. They declined as a judicial review into the policing of the protest is still pending.
Andrew Wood's a former press officer for the Campaign Against Arms Trade. 4 years ago, he went along to the AGM of a company with links to the industry.
We decided that we were going to have a very low-key presence, and there was no one outside the hotel with any banners or placards. There were a couple of people handing leaflets, literally a couple of people handing leaflets to the shareholders.
On leaving the meeting, Andrew and a colleague were confronted by 2 FIT teams and an evidence-gathering team from the Met.
The police had pursued us from the hotel where the AGM was held. They photographed us and then they stopped us in the street, several officers. We were once again stopped by the police. A police vehicle drew up, several officers got out, there are 4 or 5 of them I believe, and I and my colleague were questioned, were asked for our personal details, what had happened at the AGM at the hotel.
The police followed them across the park, up the street, into the tube station, all the way to the ticket barrier.
They asked the ticket inspector to look at my ticket and try and get my personal details, my name, etc. from the ticket, but they weren't successful.
Andrew, who's never been arrested, says he and his colleague both felt intimidated by the police pursuit.
We intelligence gather against those individuals who we know are coming to events to commit offences.
I've met a number of people who don't have criminal records, have never been in trouble with the police, yet they were subject to being videoed, having their photos taken, being forced to give their details to individual officers. So how can that be justified?
Well, it depends on the circumstances. In some circumstances, we will end up filming a group of people who all happen to be around, while we're focusing on one or two individuals.
I think that's complete garbage from my own personal experience. I've been videoed on two protests, two entirely peaceful protests, one to do with the Middle East and one an entirely peaceful, not even a march, more a walk down a Cambridge path, protesting against student fees. And on both those occasions, I was videoed. And the question is, what basis was there for the police to believe that I was going to commit some kind of criminal offence just because I was protesting against something?
What do the forward intelligence teams do with the material that they gather?
Specifically, I don't know. We deal with all material that is received in a lawful manner, in a way that we're permitted to by law. If we've inadvertently gathered material that's of no value about criminals, it'll be disposed of because we haven't got the time or the space to do it.
It's taken 4 years, but last month the High Court ruled that while the police could take Andrew's photo if they had grounds for suspicion, as there was no criminal investigation, they could not store them.
They said the police had breached my human rights, that the police had broken the law in acting in the way that they did, specifically in terms of retaining the photographs and other information. And the police acted disproportionately in keeping that information, in building up a file on me.
Incredibly, despite the ruling, his details remain on a second database. The police are adamant this type of surveillance is here to stay.
It will not stop. We have a very straightforward responsibility and a right to film those who are breaking the law and to gather evidence in a way, and you wouldn't expect anything else. But we need to understand what are the implications of this case, and we'll issue guidelines when we know a little more about it.
So surveillance will continue, but campaigners say police are increasingly acting to prevent some protests taking place at all. In April this year, the police carried out what's believed to be the biggest preemptive raid on environmental campaigners in UK history. Here, they arrested 114 people believed to be planning direct action against a nearby power station. It was E.ON's power plant in Nottinghamshire, which had been targeted by activists before.
It's the police's job to prevent violence, to prevent serious harm to other people, but it's not their job just to stop protest. Protest itself is not just lawful, it's admirable. It's what citizens should be doing in democracy.
The arrests were for conspiracy to commit aggravated trespass, but as yet no one has been charged. Police officers are at least accountable. These men are private security guards employed by another energy company, Npower, which had had trouble with protesters squatting on its land.
I saw two pinstripes lawyers coming down the roads, surrounded by full security guards with high-vis jackets and balaclavas on, at which point I started filming.
Adrian Arbib is an award-winning wildlife photographer and journalist. He'd heard rumours kingfishers' nests were being illegally destroyed by workmen and went to gather evidence.
They marched towards me and said that I should stop filming. I showed them my press card. Didn't seem to make any difference. They continued to, if I continued to film, then I would be breaking the law and could go to jail.
But he carried on filming them, filming him, filming them.
This is a copy of a High Court injunction granted yesterday. I particularly refer you to paragraph 6, in which you're not allowed to take photographs of any protected persons, which includes ourselves and security people on this site.
Is this Npower's property, this road?
No, this is a public highway, so I'm perfectly entitled to be here. It's done purely to frighten people, to put people off. I mean, if you've got these security guards running around balaclavas and threatening them with 5 years, and people 5 years in jail, people back off. They don't come here.
The injunction was aimed at 6 protesters, including retired government scientist Dr. Peter Harbour. Remember him? It was granted on evidence supplied by NPower employees and a police report.
The security guards and various other people associated with the power company sent evidence anonymously to the High Court. They didn't appear there. We weren't notified that they did so. And the judge was persuaded on the basis of this anonymous evidence that there was a case for an injunction. What this policeman gave to the High Court.
A respected professional who says he's never been arrested or even failed a security check in his life was alleged to have threatened, harassed and even driven his camper van at NPower security guards.
Were you ever charged with that offence?
No, in fact, I have a letter from Police Accident Records dated the 2nd of April, which says that there was no incident involving my vehicle on the dates concerned.
Dr. Harbour says he wasn't told about the hearing, although NPower says notification was sent out, but only after the initial injunction was granted. Not only was he named on the sweeping High Court injunction, he then discovered the injunction was put on a website, but not just any website. NETCU, the National Extremism Tactical Coordination Unit, was set up to respond to the threat of domestic extremism.
It linked our campaign to domestic extremism, and it was the official view.
How did that make you feel?
Well, it's a very shocking thing for someone who's been working professionally in a field of science where honesty is the most important thing that can be. And to be accused of domestic extremism like that is truly shocking.
But why would NETCU have on its website a 70-year-old pensioner who doesn't have any criminal record down as a domestic extremist? Why would they have that on their website?
I've never seen anything like that on the NECTU website.
I have.
Right, well, you'll have to demonstrate that to your viewers, because I can't talk about that because I've never seen anything like that.
Well, here it is, with Dr. Harbour's name clearly visible. It's since been removed. Despite the injunction, the little guys won in the end. NPower abandoned its plans and the lakes are to become a wildlife sanctuary. So Dr. Harbour's persistence paid off. The police say none of this is designed to prevent people like him standing up for what they believe.
Don't come and tell me that the leader of ACPO has got some kind of vested interest in preventing lawful protest, because that actually goes against my culture, my background and my upbringing, and my belief in the point of lawful protest as a legitimate way of making statements.
I don't get any compensation out of this, you know. This wasn't done for the money, this was done for the principle. People need to take this action if they want to safeguard democracy, because no one else will do it for you.
And in its report on G20, the Home Affairs Select Committee described the police operation as remarkably successful, but attributed that in part to luck rather than judgment. The MPs said they could not condone the use of inexperienced officers on the front line, and they branded the failure of some to wear their ID numbers as unacceptable. All forces, the MPs said, should remember that those who choose to protest on Britain's streets are not criminals, but citizens exercising their democratic rights. Next week, Panorama reveals the emerging truth about torture and the Bush White House.
We are coming, but who are we? The children of the world stop in their tracks and a trap closes in around Captain Jack.